And now, it's time for that great new game show.
It's the PowerShell Podcast. It's all about PowerShell and the PowerShell community.
The PowerShell Podcast.
And now, here's your hosts, Jordan Hammond and Andrew Plaw.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the PowerShell Podcast. I am participant Jordan with Ultra Megastar Andrew Plaw hosting the show. And today we have special guest Gael Colas, who is, I'm going to say, an expert at conventions at this point. You seem quite present in these.
Active, yes. Expert is always, in some areas, maybe. Let's put it like this. So not the whole PowerShell thing. There's much bigger experts.
So I knew you were a big deal when we attended your talk at Summit this year, and your information about the speaker, first name only, just Gael. I couldn't find your last name at all. My write-up about your talk, it just says Gael in there because I couldn't find your last name anywhere.
Well, actually, my handle usually is Gael Colas, so first name, last name in one word. And then you can find me on Twitter and GitHub, everything. I try to keep it consistent.
Now, we mentioned you being a pretty common attendee of conferences and running them and all kinds of stuff. Did you initially, like your participation in tech conferences and speaking at user groups and stuff, did that occur through PowerShell, or were you already active in that kind of capacity before getting introduced to the PowerShell community?
No, that was really with the PowerShell community that I started. And it was PowerShell Summit Europe back in 2014, I think, the first one. Or at least the first one I attended. And that was in, I can't remember. Yeah, the first one was in Amsterdam. And then the second one was in Stockholm, if I remember correctly. So that's the first two conferences I've been to. And then from there, I just couldn't stop. So I just kept going. And then I went to the US and obviously PSConfEU after that.
So you've been in the game for a while now. Got to kind of experience a few different trends.
Yes. Well, I got addicted to PowerShell, and then as soon as you open the door to the community, and then you're just blown away. You've got this, meeting the people, and then like everyone sharing what they've learned, discovering new things that you can do with the things that you believe that you can, get by. No, that was amazing. So then I just wanted to see again the community, and then I kept going and kept trying to go to different events, PowerShell Conference Asia, PowerShell Summit North America. So yeah, I've tried to go wherever I could.
What were you doing with your professional career at the time of getting exposed to PowerShell and kind of taking it and running with it?
Yes, so I started, I was doing a computer science degree, kind of boring, but I knew quite early I wanted to do IT. And then I was more in the network side of things at the very beginning. And very quickly I shifted to more like a system administrator. And then I went to first in the Unix world a little bit, and then went into Windows world. And I just can't click, and I really don't like the clicking things. Maybe that's because I did mostly networking and Unix before, so then I just wanted to have another way of doing it, and VBS was definitely not an option for me. So when I've seen this PowerShell thing, I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. So I just wanted to dive into that, and it clicked straight away. So really liked it.
That's a common thing I hear for VBS is it was widely used, but I never heard anyone that was excited to be using it the way we get with PowerShell.
Yes, it was. I don't know. So it would, it was doing the job, but it was not a nice experience. And I think none of the experience was nice. Like you could do some things, but it would really be a bit hacky, and then no one would spend that much time to do nice things with it. It would just get the job done as quickly as possible, and usually it's dirty, and you don't want to have 1,000 lines to manage because it's just too hard to maintain. Not something you really want to spend your time with.
And how did you go from kind of learning PowerShell, oh, wow, this is super cool, then you discover that there are user groups in this whole community? When do you start taking the step from reading these blogs to maybe starting your own or speaking at conference or at user groups or whatever? When do you make that change?
Well, I didn't start with the blogs and things. I really went for the books first. I got some books, and then by discovering the books, it's like, oh, I have these books I really like. And then I realized that was Don Jones, writing it. And then I realized that, oh, that's the guy I saw at that conference. So it was really by getting to know the people that you start to know what's happening and how to connect with that community. When you have people that you can really exchange, and then you just try, before you would just say, hey, this is my number. But no, we have so many other ways to communicate that this is the way you can discover what's happening in the community. I use group somewhere, things going virtual, or just, a podcast or something like this. And then I would just be more and more interested. So it's more about the people, and then the people sharing their experience and, what they're learning. This is where the information is and the interaction is as well.
Yeah, it's kind of my favorite thing about this whole PowerShell situation that we're all in. We get this beautiful language where we can get so much value from our careers. It's fun. It's cool. We can go through it. But also as people, we're kind of growing, and it provides a lot of other opportunities to grow as individuals outside of just technical stuff. And I think we were watching your talk from Summit about, what was it called? Non-coding skills for successful. Yeah, non-coding skills for successful automation in your organization. And I really enjoyed that talk because I think you did a good job at highlighting that it's more than just code, right? You need people to run your code. There's a lot of other things that play a part in getting any kind of change happening in an organization. And I guess to kind of turn this into a question, go ahead.
No, a lot of it is about value. How can we deliver value? And then obviously coding is a good tool for us to deliver the value. But first you need to understand what the business around you would like you to provide the value.
And I think you mentioned that poking people, I think the stick method of poking people to motivate them isn't always the best method.
Yes.
What are some alternative systems you've found for encouraging people to do certain behaviors?
Well, there's a book I really like about this, which is Drive by Daniel Pink. And Drive really tells you, what is motivation and how can someone be motivated. So how do you want to keep someone engaged? Well, you don't want them to do something that they don't understand the purpose. If you give them a purpose and you let them build the intrinsic motivations, then they will be able to do the best because they know why they're doing it. They know the impact it can have, and they know how they can, improve it. If you're trying to change what they're doing, like do this ticket, do this ticket next, you're removing, all the context about why you need to do this and why the business cares about those things and why it's important and people will like you doing this job. You just say, well, do this ticket and close it. So the incentive you're giving is just closing tickets, and there's not much fun into just closing tickets. You got a little bit of dopamine effect, when I've finished it, but then you have nothing about the quality and the why you're doing it. So back to also Simon Sinek books, start with why. People need to understand why you're doing something, and then they're more likely to be motivated about it.
So there were two major takeaways from that talk that really stuck out to me. The first was, it doesn't matter how good your code is if nobody adopts it, which yes. I've given a version of that several times since I heard you say that. And the other one is almost view the project as a business transaction instead of a project, with the person requesting the code as your customer. And that way you're more likely to reach out and keep them involved.
Well, the project mindset usually is the first thing to go in the wall. It's the first thing that people are doing. Yeah, you need to do this project, but then they don't see it within the business, because project has a start and maybe has an end. But usually when you want to have an impact, it doesn't start somewhere or end somewhere. It's about what are people trying to achieve? If they make money out of what you're doing, how? And then do they just make money from a date to the end date? Usually it doesn't work like that. So what about maintenance? What about doing something and then use it as early as possible to give you the feedback, and then increment the value over time and maintain it over time as well, so then they carry on using it.
Well, based on the answer you've given us, it seems like you've put a lot of thought into this problem over the time and you have some experience with it. Was there a point when you were kind of not taking any of this advice, hadn't learned any of these lessons, was kind of going about things in a way that wasn't the most efficient, and you had to kind of learn, and now you've organically kind of learned this new method of approaching things that kind of works with you, and I think your job now is, I believe, a consultant.
Yes. So I'm a consultant. I have my company doing consulting exactly in this. So very focused. I like to be really still hands-on in the PowerShell and DSC fields, because I believe if you disconnect the hands-on approach to this a bit more theoretical approach to, and I will call it DevOps, and I will come back to this later, to the DevOps mindsets and practices and principles. If you disconnect it, you believe that people will believe that DevOps is for devs, or it's not for the right persons, or Agile or Scrum or these tools don't apply to the PowerShell people, the PowerShell environment, and these automation systems engineer, all of these people. So I like to still be hands-on, just to show people that it works and it applies to us as well. And why I realized that is because I've been doing all of the jobs from desktop support to engineering, and all along the way, managing Exchange, managing infrastructure, doing automations on desktops and servers and Windows, Linux, all of those. So I've seen the pain, and I always try to fix the pain. But then you realize at some point that it's not about writing the code to do it, is changing the culture around what's happening and why you do things.
It's so interesting. Because you mentioned earlier context and seeing the bigger picture, and I feel like as we go through PowerShell and we solve problems, we kind of learn to view the bigger picture, and the kind of causes and effects, and how to actually solve things. And so often we do find it's culture. We do find that there's this huge impact that is so, it seems, distant from the code that we write, right? When we get so in our brains, oh, this is the most effective way to do it. But it's culture that really is what you're going to be relying on at the end of the day a lot of the times.
But people don't like when you call it culture, because it's fuzzy. It's a gray area. So it's like, yeah, but how do we change culture? Well, the problem with that is culture is what you do. So then, it's what you do, but if I do it wrong, then what should I do? So this is why it's not an easy, there's no silver bullet. It's not something that you can say, yes, you just have to follow those lines, and you have to do Scrum. And then when you tick all the Scrum boxes, then you will be agile. That's definitely not the way it works. So you need to make people understand you have this problem, you can use this tool, which could be Scrum, could be something else, and that's going to solve this problem. When you write code, when you write PowerShell, you can find tools to be more productive writing PowerShell. But at some point, that's not going to be enough, because it's not going to be a PowerShell problem. It's an organization problem. It's a culture problem. So that's why it's usually there's more to it than just PowerShell. And then at some point, you want to have a huge impact in your company, but you're limited by everything else but the thing that you can write. So you need to understand all of those problems to be able to start solving them.
I think that was near the end of your talk. It was, we all spend our life with the tech, so that comes easy to us. The hard part is the communicating, which yes. I agree. I didn't even consider soft skills something I should bother with until this last summit, and I'm way behind. I got a lot of work to do.
Well, everyone struggled, but even if you have the right concepts on the right things, communicating around them and being able to express them is the first struggle you will have. You can understand and see from your experience that your job has an issue which is not about the code, not about the automation. Maybe you should not even write automation. If you were not doing something which is wasteful, then maybe you would have more time to do something more valuable. But being able to communicate around this is the first struggle that we all have. And communication is key. And if we engage more, and that's why I think the community is very valuable, then we will learn how to communicate about those problems. How can we identify and then share the experience that we have, and then improve the system from within?
I think earlier you mentioned when you were learning PowerShell, you saw that Don Jones wrote a book, You identified him as an expert. You kind of saw the people he was interacting with and kind of used that as a way to learn what best practice was. And I think in a similar light, that's what the community does. We have some people of authority, or people view them with some kind of expertise, and so they kind of respect what they say. They may recommend some certain things, and you can then kind of take that, internalize that to your organization, say, hey, here's what so-and-so says and what Microsoft suggests, and here's some documentation supporting it and why it's maybe the better approach. And I think it's very cool how someone can go at an organization that's maybe culturally a bit far behind and a bit stagnant, and they can maybe hopefully implement some principles and things they see outside into their organizations to actually drive some change. But it is such an interesting, challenging problem.
And there's a lot of many people fall in the cargo cult trap. They see people having some practices and they just try to re-implement the same practices without understanding why this is a good approach to do this. And maybe it's not even relevant to them, or it's not the bottleneck. So the theory of constraints dictates that if you make any improvement not at the bottleneck, you're not really improving your system. So you want to focus on what's really the problem for you on your environment. Then if you address those problems, even just slightly, then you will improve your overall system. So don't try to spend time maybe being agile if actually you're not even working on the right thing to start with. How do you know if you're working towards the right goal? How do you know if you're making progress? All of those, you have different tools. You have toolkits, like Scrum is a toolkit, and you can use some of it or all of it depending on your needs. And then you can understand a bit better what you're trying to achieve and if you're making progress over time.
I think you highlighted another, just kind of circle back to how important context is. Why are we solving the problem? All the context around it. You mentioned it earlier with people just solving tickets, but really it applies to so much. People solving tickets and using the context to feel like their work is valuable, but also it informs your decision making regarding why we're doing things. And yeah, I feel like that is lost so much, the why, because there's almost always in tech, you can choose between different things. You can choose your configuration, but why? How do we document these things? How do we make these choices going forward? How do we know why we've made these choices? So if we have to change things, we don't break everything.
And many people complain about, priorities changing and shifting, every day, every week, and they're not keeping track or not even caring anymore because it changed too fast that you don't have time to actually solve something before you are asked and tasked to change to something else because, priority changes. So there's tools and techniques to manage this and to highlight, why this is happening and what's really being asked of you, but it's always people are really disconnected. This is a new thing, quiet quitting. I've heard, but it's not really exactly the same thing, but it applies where people are just be more distant. They just try to get the thing they have to do done because that's the expectation they have, like people have out of them. But we need to change this.
I think that a part of that we've talked to guests about before is taking pride in your work and taking responsibility and pride for the systems that you manage and are responsible for, because they really are systems, kind of complex systems at times. And if we can take pride in our work and feel connected, like you mentioned, understanding the context, how important what we provide to the company is, even if we're only fixing one small part of it. But I have a question about, because we're talking about thinking about the whole system, and that can take some experience to be able to do that. And for me, I found that as I went through PowerShell and kind of was learning more and more and started interacting with things on a bigger scale, I found that I was able to think about systems like you're describing in a much more tangible way that my brain was never able to do before. Have you found that kind of change in yourself as you go through your career where you're able to really think about in a more systemic way of what's kind of going on?
It took a long time. It took a long time and few books and lots of interactions. I quite early, because of DSC and because of other things, I followed Stephen Moravsky and followed, the things he was saying. I interacted a lot with him. I met him many times as well during conferences. And then I've read, he's got a DevOps list of books that you can read, and I was trying to follow up, but every time he adds more, so I given up. I'm trying to catch up, but a lot of things like this, and trying to understand. I could see in isolation, they like this specific problem I can understand, but I couldn't understand how it would be within the full system. But then when you start understanding that a system is just composed of many other systems, there's always something that as input from outside, and then you just have to use the right concepts and the right models. They're not perfect because they're models, but then you can isolate some issues, and then you can say, okay, in this problem, I recognize it, I know, and I can see what's coming in and what's coming out and where the problem lies, and then I can, put that in a part of my brain, and then can focus on another part. And at some point, when you start decomposing, you have a better understanding of the overall system. But it took me a while and a lot of books. The Phoenix projects really, really kicked it, because it was trying to very quickly go through a lot of those things where you have an IT problem, or what you believe is an IT problem, and then the story goes and explains you that it's not just an IT problem. It actually has many inputs, many different teams trying to collaborate, and many bottlenecks depending on the teams. And in the end, they find a way to solve it. So really, really good book.
Yeah, Phoenix Project, I actually had that recommended before. I have it on my nightstand, but I haven't read it. But it's a fiction version of solving an IT issue, right? Like it's like I don't know exactly how to explain it, but it's not like a regular self-help. It's more like just a story that they tell where it kind of encompasses all the issues you might run into.
Yes, it's really a story, and that's why it's good, because it's very easy to read, and it flows quite well, because it's a bit stressful, because I saw myself and I saw my teams a lot when I was reading this, and you're reading this and it's like, this is a problem I have day to day at work. But it shows you that the different elements, and when you talk about systems, all those components trying to work together and being very inefficient at doing it, and then you realize that a lot of those things, the problems they show, are things that you have been experiencing in your day-to-day job. So in that way, it doesn't really explain you how it fixes it, and they say, hey, use this, and it's a bit magic, Kanban, and it's a bit magic. It doesn't really go deep into that, but there's reference books for that. It really tells you the story and why all of those things together make it really hard for IT to deliver as the business expects.
And I think it's super helpful seeing it in someone else's story, because we all, or at least if you're listening to this, you probably work in IT, but we're so biased and we're so used to it. And sometimes you can be so busy that it can be really impossible to see the full context. But by seeing this other dude's story, you can see what's similar to you, what's not. And just as its own account, you can observe what's kind of going on. And there's so much to learn. It is such a game changer. If you haven't read the book yet, I highly recommend it. Highly. It's entertaining. It kind of reads like a movie, sort of like you're just watching this story play as you read through.
And back to what we said earlier about communications, when you read this and you read this story, it's dialogues as well. So you know how people communicate about those problems. And that teaches you, and that taught me, how we can analyze and communicate about a problem. And then, then obviously there's so many gray areas that left, but a lot of unanswered questions. But then when you know about those, and you know about those patterns that you can recognize, and then you can discuss them with your team, your managers, then you can say, okay, now we know that we need to dig a little bit deeper. And then we can, open another book or find another ways, maybe get a consultant, whatever, dig a bit to understand better the problem and try solutions. Some will work, some won't work, but at least you will try something.
So it's not common where you see anymore like something that unique, right? Like you don't hear about fiction books that cover a beginning to end process for an IT issue. Are we missing a major genre? Should we be writing more of these?
I think the problem is IT people thinking that their problem is unique because they believe, because we're in IT, it's different, No, it's not. It's not. And then just IT is the tool that we use in creating some solutions and creating some value for the businesses. But at the end of the day, we're still a bunch of people trying to collaborate. And this is where usually the problem is. And that goes again to what we discussed earlier, which is, okay, we need to collaborate. That means we need to manage the work we're doing, understanding the context in a business way, and then where, what does it impact and which other teams it impacts. The problem is not just the IT thing that we're doing. We're not in the tunnel vision. We need to have a bit more situational awareness, understand what's the business is going on and why what we are doing in IT makes, is a problem or not, or he's helping or not, he's creating value or not for the business.
It's a great way to put it. I definitely find myself, and I've definitely seen other people fall into the trap of thinking that we're special or computers are super duper unique or anything like that. But one thing that is really interesting to me about DevOps and the way that we try and solve problems more efficiently is that it kind of represents us as humans learning to solve problems with systems in the most efficient way possible. Because the way that I view it is there's a ton of financial incentive to develop software faster, more efficiently, like such a large amount of money incentivizing this kind of thing that as humans, we're kind of have figured this out. And to me, it's so interesting and reassuring that a large part of our conclusions is that it is human. And it is that there is so much importance in the way that we communicate, like you're saying. Just as a human going through the world and the way I've perceived things for a while, I just assumed it was all code. We just needed to put the smartest people who could type the best buttons and we'd solve all the problems. But like to now see it from my perspective, where I view communication is so important, and now to see the kind of world at large, seeing that spread out from some of the top organizations and some of the most well-respected people in our field is quite interesting and really cool to see that we are just all people trying to work on stuff together.
Yeah, I like to think that writing code is what we can be busy with when everything else works. So when your communications, collaborations is working fine, then you can focus on the code. But if you haven't, before that, then writing the code is probably not going to help you. No one's going to use it, or you're doing something that's not going to be solving the problem that you thought you had. Probably you didn't, catch the right problem. So that's why you can only code when everything else is already done for you, like the communications and collaborations.
Yeah, the Phoenix Project is a big book for my career. I read it and I saw the way that they you need to handle tickets this way, and there needs to be more of this and that. And I implemented what I could with our ticketing system and went through all that, and it was very, very, very enjoyable. And I recommend, if you're listening to this and maybe you have read the book, maybe you haven't, give it a read. And I recommend or try to set it as like a standard for your team. Kind of make it assigned reading, get everyone on similar pages of like, hey, here's kind of the direction we can head. Here's some things we should stop doing. Here's what we should start doing. Here's where we're really weak. Here's where we're doing pretty well. And kind of go through and set that. So going forward, you're actually working on the systems and you're not just running in place.
It really levels up the communication within your team. If everyone has the same basis, you don't have to talk exactly about your company, and people can be, passionate about, what's happening within the company. But if you just use, the names or the situations within the book, then you can be much more constructive sometimes. So you say, well, we have a Brent problem. Brent is one of the main character, very techy, very good. That might be you listening to the podcast. You might be the Brent for the team that you're working with. And then, how do we address this problem? How do we get Brent delivering more value and stop just supporting everyone? How do we do that?
Yeah, I bet there are a lot of people listening who feel like they are perpetually putting out fires all the time. And if you're using PowerShell and you're the PowerShell person at your work, I'm sure you're spread even more thin with your responsibilities. So
I was the first adopter for PowerShell at my last job, and I did notice it becomes like a magic wand. Like you'd be discussing who can do a certain thing, and it's, this magic can handle it, but where no one else was picking that up, there's just a fancy way of saying that I could do it. So I can see how you can get spread out pretty quick like that.
Yeah, and many people ask why, say you're in your company and you're the PowerShell guy. Why are you the PowerShell guy and there's no one else? Why no one else is going in there? So there might be elements in the book that tells you, why. If you have one guy doing the things, and then basically you say, yeah, it's a team, we all do the same thing, but this guy is the PowerShell guy. So if you think about DevOps and flow, then you have created, even if it's within the team, if on paper you're on the same team, you have created a work center. So you have issues like that. You have different people doing different tasks, even if it's within the same team, but they have very specific things they're doing. The VMware guy, the Exchange guy, the PowerShell guy. So basically you have queues between each of those people for a given task. The PowerShell guy is going to do something like generate a report, so then the Exchange guy can do the fixes. So you just create more queues, more ticket systems within the team. Even if it's less of a problem because you don't have to put everything in a ticket, it still creates queues between it, so the performance is not optimum.
Yeah, I found that I enjoyed being the PowerShell guy at my work in the beginning. It was quite nice. But then I quickly realized that it's not sustainable, and I want to leave this company one day in a place where they can still use the solutions, and that ain't going to happen. They may not be able to replace me with someone who is as fluent in PowerShell. So I kind of switched my mindset to I will develop some solutions, make sure that they're usable, train people on them, and when it comes time to make a fix, make sure go through them with GitHub, kind of go through the things, train when possible, and as often as possible, to be honest. Because to me, working with others and teaching them how to use PowerShell was super enjoyable. And also as the PowerShell guy, like you're mentioning earlier, that was kind of my field. I had a lot of respect, and it would go a long way. It felt nice to kind of be able to share that with others and see them get their value and go through what I went through. And it's a fun process.
But it doesn't work when you are purely in a project mindset. When you have a project where you start something, and then when it's finished, it's handed over, then these project mindset don't really work with training alongside or maintaining over time, supporting a solution, like whether it's a PowerShell solution or something else. So that's get back, that works, but then you need to make sure the culture also is good for this type of approach.
I struggle with this one because my belief has always been, stick me in a dark room and I'll make management look good. I don't want to. So I feel like I've actively been seeking the exact opposite of what we're talking about here.
So that works the time, and the problem is at some point you will be limited. So you want to have an impact. You want to help out people, whether it's management, whether it's the business, the team. You want to help out people, and at some point you will say, well, I could do more if. And the problem is the if it's outside of just your PowerShell, your editor, and then whatever you can do with your PowerShell stuff. So at some point you will be limited by others or limited by your company, and at that point it's well, yes, it's not sustainable because you maxed out on this model maxed out, as Andrew was saying. If you're the PowerShell guy, at some point you just can't maintain more systems. You can't create more codes that you will have to maintain. Something has to give. Basically, your impact is limited because you can't scale these improvements.
That makes sense. We'll see about changing my mindset. I'm pretty stubborn.
I think it's a pretty common mindset for people in IT, especially when I got in, to have, is to kind of, it was more of an isolated kind of thing. And I think that it's interesting to see the culture generally is shifting into more of a collaborative, more of a involved type of approach.
I think that changed with the tech. I would say, it changed with the technology, because we used to have one server, then maybe we had two servers, and then we had, now we may have 10 servers. And then, now we have 100 server, and then, everything goes through the window when you have this. I know you have the cloud, you have the clouds, so you have even more clouds. So then, and you still haven't gotten rid of the old stuff that you had 20 years ago, like, I don't know, your Active Directory for us from 20 years ago or something like that. So you're just spreading, you diversify the things that you have to do. So then you need more people, but complexity is a strange equation. Complexity is about how complex is the system, but then how complex it is to work with many people on the system, and then doing this over 10 years, makes it even more complex. So the complexity equation has many factors, and then if one factor is big, whether it's time, it's number of systems, it just goes really, really bad really quickly.
I was reading through you have a reading list up on your website. And first of all, the number one recommendation was Phoenix Project. That's the top of the list, which I think says something there. But at the very end, it says you have all the books stacked in the corner waiting for the bookshelf to be built. But looking back there, looks like mission accomplished. You've done it.
Yeah, I've done a few. There's still yes. I at some point I was thought like, oh, I'm really discovering like so many new things that I wished I knew before with those books. So at some point I say, okay, let's do a target. I will try to have 12 books this year. And I managed 11, so I was happy with that. It doesn't matter if you don't really do the 12, but I had 11 books, and then that really helped me basically building my understandings, because there's so many things and it's overwhelming because there's problems, it's about culture, and then you've seen a few talks about culture, the CALMS principles and things like that, but it's still very fuzzy. So then you have to build those different models in your head, understand how they which area they're looking at and how you can apply some of the tools and techniques they suggest. And then you have these, if you have enough of them, then you can really have an impact and understand how the system works.
Okay. I'm loving the DevOps talk. I kind of want to bring up one other thing that comes to my mind whenever I think about PowerShell, systemic thinking, DevOps, and that is efficiency. And for me, understanding how important and how efficient it is to communicate, how efficient it is to write good documentation, how efficient it is to automate processes, how efficient it is to be kind and not blame other people. Like such small things can be so powerful. How efficient it is to ask a question for clarity, especially if you're a respected like technical contributor on your team. These are all massively efficient things. And I like framing it as efficiency because PowerShell, we're in that efficiency mindset. We're solving problems, we're saving time, but that also applies to this whole personal communication side of things as well, where doing the right thing is super efficient. And by crossing those lines in my mind, I just found it was so much easier to see the value of the human interactions and spending resources and trying to become better at interacting with other people, better listener, even in this current age, better at writing because we communicate so often through a written medium.
I tend to see it the other way. I don't know if it's so I try to focus on what is wasteful, which is kind of the same thing, right? But put in the other way around. I say, okay, what is wasteful? So and why doing this is wasteful? Because if you think efficiency, then you will always try to go towards what you believe is a best practice, but not necessarily a best practice for you in your current state and environment. So if you focus on what is wasteful and say, okay, let's try to chip away what's wasteful. And it like sometimes you will try to chip away something wasteful, which is not, but you didn't realize why. So at least you will understand that you removed something that was useful. But think about what's wasteful, and then you will have a better way of communicating about what's the priorities, for instance. How do you manage those work? So I really like. So it's kind of the same thing. I'm just I like to discuss about what's wasteful, so then you can focus at taking this apart slowly, and then focusing in the end in the efficiency, which is what you want to keep.
Nice. So gives me some food for thought. Change my little working model a little bit.
I'm kind of cracking up at Andrew's excitement because when he started working at PDQ, the first thing he did, we have a lot of people that do PowerShell, but it's all segmented. And so within 2 weeks of him starting here, when he's still learning the ropes, he had combined together, but like a PowerShell guild where we get together and work through some things together. So the first thing he did joining the company was take a bunch of PowerShell people and made them into a controlled group, which was, I thought, interesting. I didn't think of that for 4 years, so it was a big change for me.
Yep. For me, it's just I see the value of that collaboration. I just know it. It's not like, if you know the value of something, it becomes and you understand the context, like you said earlier, it becomes very easy to do the thing that you perceive to be valuable. And that is collaboration, that's communication, that's talking about problems, working on problems together, all kinds of stuff.
And people who've seen, people like there's a lot of value in experience. So people that have had this experience somewhere else, they will be able to show you the value. They will tell you, this is a problem. you can tell me it's a problem until I see it, until I hit the wall. I'm not going to learn from it. So you can tell me, at some point you're going to have this problem. And I will say, yeah, fair enough, but I don't see it yet. But then you can help people go into that wall softly so they understand there's this wall, there's this problem. And then they can say, oh, I understand it now. And then they can use that and improve without, being painful too hard, because someone with experience helped you to get there. So yes, I really like this approach of cross training and having different cross pollination and that the collaboration doesn't have to stop to the org chart. And usually, if that happens, there's an issue, and you have to you really have to do by technology is a good way to do it, but also to value stream. And I will get into that maybe another time.
I do love talking about this stuff. I love when I engage that part of my brain where I have to think about the full picture and why people are doing things and how they could do things better. And because to me, everything can be viewed through this kind of lens. Dang near everything. I kind of view through this lens.
There's a talk from, I believe, Crescent, he's working at Stack Overflow, and he did a talk about wordley mapping and wordley maps. And part of it, so when you start, even if you don't go too deep into the wordley maps, I think it's very useful, even as an engineer, a PowerShell guy in your company, to visualize where you are in the stream or in the value stream. The value stream is your company is providing a service that people think, oh, the service is valuable, so I'm going to give your company money, right? That's very high level. And within that, you can be very, very far from this main value stream, or at least you can feel that you're very far. But it's good to understand where you sit, where do you provide value within that value stream? Because if you improve this value stream, people will see that you have an impact, because that's what really matters. So if you start, drawing on a piece of paper, and I really like when I join a team trying to ask the questions to just say, okay, so what's your value stream? So how can we reverse engineer from the team that I've just joined? Where is the value and where do we come in to help for that value? So I think that's a very good tool that anyone can use. And I believe one of my talk goes very quickly into this as well. But Chris went a bit deeper with the wordley maps, because you can really visualize what you should be working on and not working on, basically, because it's, you can make some more educated choice if you do this kind of mapping.
Wow. I feel like we get so much wisdom from our guest, Jordan. Can we just take a second? I mean, he's dropping knowledge bombs. If you're out there listening, absorb this info. Because at least for me, it took me a lot of years to start understanding this and start breaking it down. And it's nice to see that we're at the point where people in the PowerShell community are understanding of this and have lived it and are living this kind of thing. It's not just the people who wrote the book or just the people at the top organizations, a handful of people. It's spreading. And we mentioned context, and so many of our listeners are maybe don't work at huge companies and they're small people on the teams or whatever, and understanding the context and the importance of what you do as someone who manages any system, even if it's 50 computers and 10 servers at your work or whatever. That is very important work when it comes to securing the world, when it comes to providing value to your organizations. Like, that's where a lot of change is going to come from. And if you're listening out there, I hope that you join us for the ride, take pride in what you're working on, share, communicate, be a leader in the ways that you can within your organization. Because it's just so cool that we're kind of experiencing this all as humans at once in different ways. And if we can get everything more efficient and working better, we'll be in a better place as humans.
Yeah, and the smaller the company, the closer you are from the value stream of that company. So it's even more important, because I don't have so many layers to deal with. You can it's going to be easier for you to prioritize work and to see where it impacts. And it's also very useful, for when you look for your next job or when you do something else, because you will know how it relates to the value stream. So you will be able to say, well, I improved, these systems, I improved the revenue, I improved the time spent on the tasks, and these kind of things.
I think you'll have more success changing the culture at a smaller place too. A bit easier to do that when there's less jumps between you and the people above you.
It's also like it's less diluted. Culture is what people do, to simplify a little bit. So it's the customs and the things that people do in a company. It's what the employees are doing. So if you have less people, then you are a bigger percentage, and it's also easier to influence more people to change the way they work. So that's for this reason alone, it's easier.
Awesome. Now, we're mentioning community involvement and how we're all kind of learning together and sharing what we've learned. Now, you're involved in some user groups that have been kind of popping up again lately. What user groups are you involved with?
So user groups, the London PowerShell user groups, for historic reasons. So I used to live in London for, I don't know, maybe 10 years. And I've now moved to Switzerland. So I'm still kind of organizing the London user groups because I still travel there. My company is based in London, also open in Switzerland. And then we've restarted with a few other guys from Switzerland. We've restarted the Swiss PowerShell user group, and we had the last one in Bern. And then we will go in different cities. I'm really active in the DSC community. So the DSC community is, many people from the community getting together, doing the DSC community calls, joined by the Microsoft configuration team and also the PowerShell team. And we have DSC community calls every 6 weeks. DSCcommunity.org. You can find our website. Everything's online. We have GitHub/DSC community. It's an organization with many repositories and DSC resource modules over there. Many people active and maintaining those things. So I would say that's my main community user groups. And then there's the events.
Yeah, what events are you involved in?
You organized the PowerShell Conference EU, right?
Yes, so I took over from Tobias for the PowerShell Conference Europe. Tobias used to do it from 2016, I believe, up until 2020. Well, COVID was really in the way, so that was making things much harder. And then I said, well, actually, I'd love to, take over and then carry on with the tradition and everything. And especially for me, I was really proud to be able to invite. It's not really inviting because he's been very involved in the last PowerShell Conference Europe, but him being there, not as the organizers, not having all the stress, but being able to benefit from all the things that you've done for so many years. And then that was a really good time, and we had a really good time, and I was really proud to be able to get him, being there, and almost just being a speaker, almost just a speaker. Next year, I think it's going to be even more relaxed for him, so I'm really looking forward to it.
That's kind of how these things are supposed to go, right? Whenever we develop something, we're supposed to kind of build it up, train up the next people. It's their opportunity, and it's kind of cool to see that happen with the conference. I attended the mini conference. What's the official name of the mini con?
We call it
Minicon.
We call it Minicon or PSConfEU Minicon. Yes. So that one is a bit special, and that was the first, and not the last. We are trying to do it. So basically, the in-person PowerShell Conference Europe, which is the big event, in person, and then in different cities in Europe at the moment. So last year was in Vienna, Austria, and then the next one will be in Prague, in the Czech Republic, and that's in June. So around mid-June, let's say roughly around mid-June. And then we try to have the minicon in September, around mid-September. The reason for that is there's always talks we can't deliver, our speakers can't make it, fall sick, with COVID or something. And then we still want to have the sessions. They're prepared, they've invested time, and we want to give them the opportunity to show them and present them. And we also want to be able to reach out. So we create this minicon event, which is held on Gather. Gather is how do you call it? It's a virtual environment, very 2D, 30 tiles based old gaming feelings, a bit of nostalgia when you open Gather, but then it integrates with video conference, and you have your audio, your webcam, and you come close to people, your avatar comes close to someone, and then you can see that their video shows up and you start hearing them, and the closer you get, the clearer the picture and the sound is.
Yeah, I like to think of it as like an old pixelated game that takes place in a building, And as soon as you step near people, you can see their camera and talk. And it's very cool because there are tables, there's different rooms, there's like presenter mode. So it provides the opportunity for something we talk about a lot on this podcast that not everyone is fortunate enough to be able to attend for, which is the hallway track, right? There's this opportunity for spontaneous conversation with other people with mutual interests. And it's very cool. I was able to have conversations with people in Singapore, all over the place, as if we were in the same room, and got to learn from all different kinds of speakers. I really love that virtual collaboration platform because it's more immersive than just a Discord or Zoom call in the sense that you can have those different conversations. I know you kind of mentioned something in the pre-show about maybe some more opportunities to gather on Gather.
Yes. Yes, exactly. So we found that it works really well. So we said for PowerShell user groups, so I co-organize, so I said the London and the Swiss PowerShell user groups. And I know it's really hard to get a venue every time, be in person, so I can't be in London every month, as an example. So we thought, okay, let's do like a different approach and let's host user groups on Gather. So we have this map that actually people, so my company is SynEdgy Limited, so synedgy.com, and then you can see that we have our office, which is a virtual office on Gather, so anyone can join, and there's a co-working space. If you want to be there, you can go in the co-working space. And then from there, you can go in the garden, and from the garden, you can quickly take the bus, and that takes you to the map that we created for PSConfEU Minicon. And so, yes, this environment is really nice. It's very collaborative. It's not a one-way communication that you have in Teams where you draft just a video. If you don't like something, you can walk to someone else, find groups, discuss. Two people at the same time can share a screen, and then you can switch back and forth. So yeah, it's a very good interaction system to interact. And that's why we said, okay, let's do the user groups on Gather. And actually, we've offered it on Twitter, so we can, like PSConfEU, if you look at the PSConfEU tweets, you will be able to find it. We have an announcement where we say, you can come to PS World. This is the name we gave to the map. And then you can host any of your PowerShell user groups on this map, and we will pay for the number of people. So if you do an event and you have more than 25 people in general, you have to pay a little fee for the time of people will join. So we say, okay, we're going to take this cost, we're going to absorb this cost, and we will let anyone come in. But we want to use specific dates. So the reason for that is we can have several user groups at the same time. So we haven't announced it yet, but in January, there will be the Swiss PowerShell user group, the London PowerShell user group, and most likely the French PowerShell user group as well, doing at the same time in the same map, if you want. They will be together and they will have the different tracks. So one track's probably going to be in French, the other track's going to be in English, and most likely the Swiss one's going to be in German. But during the time, we just come back, and that's going to be in the PS World pub. We created a pub in the map, and people will go in the pub and then being able to use in Gather, going to the different rooms, whichever language they want to go, and being able to discuss like this. So if you have a user group and you want to have your group at the same time, feel free to join. And we have a form up there. I don't have the link with me, but we have a form, and you just put, hey, I'm interested. I want more details. So I'm interested. Where can I sign? You just fill that forms, and we'll get back to you.
I will be doing that because I run the Gainesville PowerShell user group, and I definitely want to go.
I was going to say, those that are listening, not watching, you can actually see excitement in Andrew. He's as soon as you mentioned that a whole bunch of user groups were joining together, I could see him already. It's like, I'm in.
It just makes sense, especially in the manner that they've gone about doing it. Like, just for our community to have some form of resource like that, to be able to basically have spontaneous conferences where anyone can attend is huge for me. I am happy that we have guests and people that can afford to attend PSConfEU or live nearby, and same thing with PowerShell Summit and all these other different conferences. But the fact of the matter is our friends, people who listen to us and people who I consider them our friends, aren't always able to for so many reasons. And it's so cool that we get this content just delivered with so many different options. The mini conf that I went to was super, super fun. And I'm looking forward to more of these. And I think that once more people attend, they'll kind of taste the awesomeness that is Gather. And that is kind of like playing a video game, sort of.
Yeah, sort of. So the platform that Gather creates is really nice for these interactions. There's a few features that we'd like to have a few more things, animations like GIFs, in the objects. So then there's a bit more interactivity with the environment. Maybe having inventories just so you can take something and take it somewhere. That would be awesome. So we're not there yet. But for the interaction, it's really good, and that's a benefit when we have this. Last time, so Minicon, the PowerShell team, like a few people from the PowerShell team came, and then you can just go run up to them, and then, hey, I have a question. Oh, I saw your presentation. That's great, and that's why it's great. You can select the people you talk to. If you are in a call, you're limited to everyone in that call, or you have to use the chat. Not necessarily the same environment, but then if you have a subject you're interested in, then you go and then you talk about that subject. Or maybe you just join, there's people over there, let's go and see what they talk about, and then just join up the conversation. Most likely it's going to be about PowerShell for us. So.
This feels like something the PowerShell team would love. In the hallway track at Summit this year, we talked to Danny and Sydney, who said that they wish more people would communicate with them. And it seems like this has just opened up a new avenue for them to get that communication. So I got to imagine this is probably something they've been they're really looking forward to as well.
Yes, they have, and I talk to them quite often for PSConfEU and for the things. And so for the next one, so the London PowerShell Users Group, Jim Tura is coming and doing a deep dive on Crescendo. We will announce it. Probably I need to send the tweet today or maybe in the next few days. But yes, so Jim Tura is coming, and when I said, oh yeah, it's going to be on Gather, people say, oh yeah, from the team, they say, oh yeah, that's good. Like they had a good time, and they really like the interaction because traveling is hard, and then this one is just something you can turn up, and it's not like a call. If you miss the first half an hour, you missed all of it. It's more like, oh, the people are still there. There's still people there, so we can still interact with them. So they don't have to come all at once. If they are at the meeting, it's fine. They can come after the meeting, before the meeting. It's more open in time. Minicon was open from noon-ish CET. And then people was there from, during 24 hours, we had people on and off. We had a peak, obviously, during the session times, but then people would just be there, some driving kartings outside or, having fun and discussing and having insight. But, that was cool. A lot of impressions.
Yeah, you mentioned Steve Lee. I got to talk to him a little bit. There was a nice conversation going there. I got to meet a listener, Nico. Shout out to Nico. I'm looking forward to the next one. I found your tweet that has the register for your interest here, and I will definitely be signing up for that. And we'll include some great links in our show notes here. We've covered a lot of great stuff, and we will make sure to have a thorough show notes for you today. Probably more links than our usual.
Perfect.
Including some book recommendations. We don't get those too often, Jordan. We got some good ones.
Well, reading's for nerds, and no one in PowerShell is a nerd, so it's difficult transition.
So many books. There's so many things that when you start asking people a little bit outside of the pure PowerShell path, and then they say, oh yeah, you should read that book, and then you realize that we're not that special. We just like PowerShell is special, but we're not that special. And a lot of things applies to us. And, we're not the first geek. We're not the first introverts. We're not the first, some other people have been through this. We need to listen to those people and then, reapply and relearn those things and share those learnings across the community.
Well, just kind of a testament to the value of soft skills is this community was built around making it so everyone felt comfortable and welcome, which involved a lot of soft skills, even getting it off the ground. So without soft skills, is the community near what it is today? I don't think it is.
And all the things I've learned, all the books I've learned about, that's coming from the community, and that's PowerShell, PowerShell Summit, PowerShell Meetups, PowerShell Conference, all of those things. So, that's the right place. Definitely. So for PSConfEU, it's always my objective, like to make it easier, like lower the bar to, what book and, how to make books more accessible, how to make, people don't need to buy the book to just, what it's about. So maybe doing a book club, something like that's one of the objectives I would like to be able to deliver for PSConfEU, something like a book club where people can discuss about the books and, why it's interesting to have this book, where you can find. So if you have to choose and you know very little about PowerShell, which PowerShell book you would use? That's the question for you. Which PowerShell book do you prefer and why?
If we could pick one. Gosh, well, two come to mind. Obviously PowerShell and the Month Lunches comes to mind, but I'm thinking of PowerShell in Action, or I don't remember the one by Lee Holmes. It was like PowerShell Cookbook. Yeah, that's it. Probably those two come to mind.
But you see, that's the thing. Like depending of what you want to do and where you are in your learnings, like some are more targeted for you. So if you're starting with PowerShell, like PowerShell in the Month of Lunches, definitely that's my go-to book for someone starting and getting to grips with PowerShell concepts. Very good way to explain it. Like I really love this book. But then at some point we say, okay, I got the basics there. Like advanced functions, I can understand and everything's fine there. Then I would say, well, then you can probably go to, as you said, PowerShell in Action. There's the conference books are good as well because you have very specific examples about some use cases. And then like there's no one book, but how to select the book you want, then it depends where you are and what you're looking for. So that's why I want to make sure that we make it a bit more, easier for people to find out what they want. Maybe having a sample of each books, and then people can just browse during the conference. Still working on this.
So I think PowerShell in a Month of Lunches is pretty much universal. If someone's starting out, I think 100% of the time recommended. It's branching off from there is when it starts getting a lot of variety available.
I'm just grabbing the books. So that's one of this is Windows PowerShell in Action. That's the one here. This is the Phoenix projects we talked about. There's Evan. So Evan in parallel, some of them like one we didn't talk about, but because I'm really into systems management and systems configuration, Infrastructure as Code, and there's a newer edition now. But from Keith Morris, that's an amazing book that explains you about even if you believe it's not completely related, because they talk in these books, they use, for instance, maybe a little bit of Share for Puppet. And on Linux, maybe mostly, the concepts really applies to everything. And it talks about the concepts. It's even using pseudocode at some point, because it doesn't really matter which tool you're using. It's about the concepts. And that is a really, really good book for that. So that's why we need to be people need to not be afraid of the books and understand what they're getting into before they even buy the book. And then, they can also buy the virtual version. But it would be nice if we had, like what library is about. If we could go to a library and then, check a book before you buy it for yourself. That's what I want at the conference to be able to do as well at some point.
Interesting. I like that idea because it's pretty relevant to my experience of buying books. You don't quite know what to expect. You just know you want this book. People say it's good. Okay, I guess I'll read it. It's 600 pages. Where do I start? What should I be looking for?
Yeah, and then why? If someone asks me, okay, why the PowerShell in Month of Lunches is a good book, then I can open the page and then I go through. I really like how they explain advanced functions on the pipeline, especially the pipeline. I see still to date many people that don't really master the pipeline, but when you read the Month of Lunches and the pipeline parts of it, how to manage the pipeline, the iteration through the pipeline, the begin process end parts of your advanced function, I say that's really like, this is the good example where they show you the code, how to do it, what happens, really step by step, good progression. I really love that. I really love this book for that. And some people, that's what they need, because it goes into details and you have different pages and different parts that explains it.
Interesting. Yeah, at first when you mentioned it, I thought you were just going to talk about some of the other books you mentioned, like Drive or something like that. But I think having it specifically for PowerShell books makes a lot of sense for a PowerShell conference.
Oh, we could do all of them. As in, infrastructure as code. Infrastructure as code is not PowerShell specific, but very relevant to many people doing any type of configuration management things in PowerShell. Why there's different type of configuration management. What is Kubernetes? Well, if you understand this, you understand why people build Kubernetes to some extent. It's just a bigger system that integrates many of those concepts. and then expanded on them, obviously, over time. But it's still, very, very similar.
Interesting. Because I feel like there's a certain value you can get from a book kind of being described, in the sense that in your head, when you're painting this picture of what is IT, what will I be working with, you can kind of get the context of like, oh, there's this solution that kind of solves this problem. I don't know any commands to do it. I just know that there's like some configuration files associated with it and they save it in a JSON. Okay, something like that. Okay, now you can move to the next thing. And then in your head, at least you have like one brush stroke of having the full view of everything. For me, being in IT, especially earlier in the show, you mentioned how complex it is these days. And that's why there needs to be this collaboration. So lost where I was going with that. So leave it there.
Nice.
I think you got to your point there. But now it's time for, this is a very important question. We have a segment called Common Parameters, where we ask 3 of the most difficult questions you'll ever get. Are you ready? Do you think you can handle the common parameters?
Common parameters? Probably not, but go ahead. I'll never be ready.
All right. What is one time something went wrong while on the job? How did you handle it? And what did you learn from it?
So very early in my career, I was doing an internship in China, and I was obviously, so I give that as a context because I was not sure of myself. I especially at the time that I didn't speak Chinese. I was really new to the job. I was doing some networking stuff, configurations. And the company I was working for wanted to install a new SDSL line. And that was a new thing for me. I kind of knew the principles. I kind of knew the network. I kind of knew how to configure the Cisco device. But it was still a bit new and in a completely new environment. So I was like, not sure of myself. And then I couldn't get it to work. And I called, the people like installing the line outside the building, and they say, yeah, it's set up. You just have to, configure your router. And then I was on the router, it's like, but it's configured. It doesn't work. And I was really sweating and doubted myself. And in the end, I was not the problem. Just, there was another issue in between, but I didn't ask early enough the question, are you sure? Can you walk me through it? And can you help me out trying to make sure I have the right configuration? Maybe I missed something. I should have asked earlier, or not just try to, close myself being photos, like spending many, many hours rereading the documentation of the router, rereading the principle about this specific line I was configuring, just to realize that my config was okay. Like, it's probably not the best optimized or whatever, but it should work. And it was not working at all. So then something had to happen. And then eventually I picked up the phone and I say, okay, I have a problem. Can you help me out? And they realized that, oh no, we didn't connect the line as we should, And that was not my fault, but I should have asked earlier.
It's not, I don't know. There's a lot of times, I think, especially early in IT, where you get the idea that asking for help is somehow a failure when really you're all working towards the same goal. I think that's a pretty common thing.
Yes. And now, if you start working with me, you will see I ask many, many questions, which can be annoying, but I'm fine with that. I can be annoying.
Questions are the best way to go about it.
I think that asking good questions and asking questions is so important to actually understanding the problems and understanding the context. Like, it is kind of required in par for the course to do that kind of thing.
Yes. So that's why if you are teaching, if today or tomorrow you're teaching someone about, getting into the job, just telling them what the job is not enough. Tell them what's happening, why you're doing this job and who is it helping and why it's helping them. Because then it's going to be much easier for them to retain the information and then to understand why what you're doing is important and why you have to do it a certain way.
All right, you ready for the second question? They only get more difficult from here.
Okay.
All right. With everything you know now, what is one tip you would give your younger self when you're first starting out in IT?
So we just covered one of them.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah, definitely ask questions. Like, yes. So failure is a key to learning. So that would be the thing. Like, if you are failing to do something, that's good. You should fail more often. If it's painful, do it more often as well. Like, there's things that you need, like, don't be afraid of failing, just make sure you fail in the control environment as much as you can. But don't be afraid of trying something and it doesn't work out. And if it doesn't work out, feel free to, like, we have an amazing community. Go and get someone in the community to say, well, I have this problem. Is anyone available to help me out? Everyone who succeeded has done it at some point. So everyone in the community is happy to help out. That's the first thing. We've all done it and we really learn from it. That's why now we know the value of it and we go and help other people. But don't, you have obviously to be respectful of everyone's time. So make sure that when you ask the question, you ask the question properly and politely, but then make sure that you ask the question and don't get stuck for 3 days, wasting your time for 3 days, just being in your corner. Many people can probably guide you. Maybe you're not even tackling the problem in the right way, and there's easier ways to go around.
Yeah, that's corrupted. Writer's block is a big one. I'll just try to power through writer's block, and that never works.
Yes. Yes.
All right, there's the last one. This is the one that brings the most dread into the hearts of our guests.
Mm.
What are your 3 favorite modules?
I thought about it. So I knew about this because I watch your podcast. There's a few that it took me a long time because I use a lot of modules, and some of them I use probably daily. I would say Pester is the one that I dreaded the most. Still annoys me when I have to write the tests, but it saves me so much time when I write new modules, when I do new modules, it saves so much time, and it just sometimes I don't need to use my brain that much because Pester is there to cover for me. So if I do something stupid, it will tell me. So it's my rubber duck in some ways. So Pester definitely is my top of the list. The other one, for similar reasons, is Sampler. And I'm cheating. Sampler is a module that I wrote, and it just helps you to create a module. So there's other modules that does the same thing. So you can look at Stucco, Press, Stucco from Brandon Olin, and then Press from Justin. So those are great because they help you being much more productive and much more consistent with the way you develop your modules. And I kind of develop a lot of modules, and I really like to have one way of doing it. And then it does all the automation for me, and I can just plug it into Azure DevOps, and it will test everything in different systems, different versions of PowerShell. So that's really something. And basically, I'm cheating because Sampler is not just a module. It uses many other modules. So as an example, Module Builder, I wanted to pick Module Builder initially from Joel Bennett because it just builds the module from different files. And that, just for my sanity and managing my modules, which are sometimes lots of functions, it's much easier for me. But then there's so many other modules that Sampler uses. You have changelog management to manage your changelog. You have, obviously, to use Pester under the hood, PSDepend to manage your PowerShell dependencies, like so many other things that Sampler is just, the pipelines that just takes everything and then put it together in some ways. On the third one, I can't go without mentioning PowerShell DSC. It's not the module itself, so I'm cheating again a bit, but I'm a big fan of configuration management. I don't really like the PSDSC module, at least some earlier versions, but since it's been open sourced by Microsoft, so PSDSC v2 and PSDSC v3, the modules, this is open source, and I think it's very exciting, and I'm really excited about the future that it can bring. And so that's why, and I'm a big fan of DSC, and I spend a lot of time doing DSC stuff. So
DSC just barely been open source in like April, right? Like it's been less than a year since it's been open source, and you're already seeing massive improvement from that?
No, but the fact that it's open sourced means there's a lot of things that we can do that we couldn't do before. Oh, okay. So before, it was never open source, so even if you had a fix or you had anything, you'd say, well, it's closed source, and you don't know what happens, you have no visibility, you don't ever know where to report things. Now you have PSDSC, which is the module, and then you have Azure Machine Configuration, which is a service from Azure that directly uses this module. They have the agent, and the agent is using directly this module on Linux and on Windows. So now it's cross-platform, it's open sourced, it enables scenarios and things that you couldn't really do before. So that's why I'm excited about it.
Those are some fantastic answers.
Thanks.
Well, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but the idea of bringing soft skills into IT actually came about by someone watching Andrew just in a regular conversation. And when trying to figure out the best place to use all of that ability for soft skills in IT, we decided that there's no better place than shilling our podcast. So go ahead and work your magic, Andrew.
PowerShell to the people, spread it wide. PowerShell to the people, please. Thank you for listening. Please leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast platform of choice. Give us a like, comment, subscribe on YouTube. And you can follow us at PowerShell Pod on Twitter, or you can email us, powershell@pdq.com. Thank you so much to our special guest, Gael, for that DevOps wisdom. And thanks again for listening. And don't forget that context is key.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming by. This was fantastic.
Thank you, guys. And I love your work, so keep it up.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the PowerShell Podcast with your hosts, Jordan Hammond and Andrew Plough.
He's a troublemaker. He's a rabble-rouser.
The PowerShell Podcast is a production of PDQ.com, making device management simple, secure, and pretty damn quick.